Remember walking into your grandmother's house on a cold winter day and feeling that wave of warmth hit you? There wasn't a single electric heater in sight, yet somehow the whole place felt perfectly cozy. Today we're exploring 25 forgotten heating tricks that kept our grandparents warm through the harshest winters. There's something almost magical about the way our grandparents kept their homes warm. Before you could flip a switch or turn a dial, families gathered around sources of heat that required skill, knowledge, and a little bit of hard work. And you know what? Those methods worked beautifully for generations. Think about this for a moment. In 1950, only 26% of American homes had central heating. That means nearly 3 out of 4 families were heating their homes the old-fashioned way. They weren't suffering through the winters either. They were comfortable. They were resourceful. And they passed down wisdom that kept entire households warm through the coldest months imaginable. By 1970, central heating had spread to about 78% of homes across the country. Suddenly, we could heat our houses with the push of a button. But then something happened that reminded everyone of the old ways. The oil embargo of 1973 hit hard. Prices skyrocketed. People waited in long lines just for gasoline, and those families who remembered how to heat without relying on modern systems, they were the ones who stayed warm while their neighbors shivered. The energy crisis of 1979 reinforced the lesson all over again. Our grandparents and great-grandparents had known something important. They understood that true comfort doesn't depend on systems that can fail or supplies that can run short. It depends on knowledge, preparation, and time-tested techniques. Now here's what makes this topic so relevant today. During the Texas freeze of February 2021, 4.5 million homes lost power. Temperatures dropped below zero in places that rarely see snow. Pipes burst. Families huddled together in freezing houses with no idea how to stay warm. Some people tragically didn't survive. But those who knew the old methods, the tricks their grandparents had used, they managed to keep their families safe and warm until the power came back on. Whether you're interested in emergency preparedness, off-grid living, or simply reducing your dependence on the electric company, these 25 methods are worth knowing. They've been tested by generations of families who didn't have the luxury of electric heat. They worked then, and they work now. How many of these methods did your family use growing up? Keep count as we go through them. You might be surprised at how many memories come flooding back. Let's start with the simplest solutions that require nothing more than what's already in your home. Did your grandmother have those thick, heavy curtains that seemed to weigh a ton? There was a very good reason for that. Before central heating became standard, our grandparents understood something fundamental about staying warm. You didn't just need to generate heat, you needed to keep that precious warmth from escaping. And they had mastered this art in ways we've largely forgotten. Let's start with thermal curtains. Those heavy drapes that hung in almost every home weren't just decorative. They were the first line of defense against the cold. A typical 1940s home lost anywhere from 25 to 30% of its heat through the windows alone. That's right. A quarter of all the warmth generated by the fireplace or stove just vanished right through the glass. But here's what our grandparents knew. Heavy wool curtains could cut that loss in half. The secret was in the weight and the weave. These weren't the thin decorative panels we hang today. These were substantial drapes, often lined with flannel or another heavy fabric that created an insulating barrier of trapped air between the cold window and the warm room. At night, when temperatures dropped, drawing those curtains was as important as stoking the fire. Many families had summer curtains and winter curtains, swapping them out with the seasons just like they did with their wardrobes. But windows weren't the only problem. Drafts sneaking in under doors and through cracks around window frames could make even the warmest room feel chilly. Our grandparents became experts at sealing drafts using whatever they had on hand. old cloth, worn-out towels, strips of fabric cut from clothes too tattered to mend anymore. These became draft stoppers, rolled up and wedged into every gap where cold air might creep through. Some families kept a dedicated draft snake by every exterior door. These long, stuffed tubes of fabric sat at the base of doors, blocking the cold that tried to sneak in along the floor. Others used old stockings stuffed with rags or sand. Nothing went to waste, and everything served a purpose. If you could feel air moving around a window frame, you'd press strips of cloth into those gaps, sometimes sealing them with paste made from flour and water that could be washed away come spring. And then there was the attic. Heat rises, as everyone knows, and all that warmth you work so hard to generate would float right up and out through an uninsulated attic. Here's something remarkable. Some homes that were insulated this way back in 1943 still have that newspaper insulation today. Contractors have opened up attic spaces and found layers of headlines from the Roosevelt era still doing their job after 80 years. The walls got similar treatment, though that required more effort. Our grandparents knew that hollow walls were basically channels for cold to flow right through the house. In rural areas especially, families would pack their walls with straw, cotton batting, or even dried corn husks. These natural materials trapped air and created a thermal barrier that could make the difference between a bearable winter and a miserable one. And let's not forget about the floors. In homes with wooden floors over unheated crawl spaces, the cold would seep up from below, making feet ache and sending shivers up your spine, even when the rest of the room felt warm. The solution was simple but effective. Rugs, lots of rugs, layered rugs, braided rugs made from strips of old fabric, hooked rugs created during long winter evenings. These weren't just decorative touches, they were practical necessities. Studies have shown that placing rugs on bare floors can make a room feel 2 to 3 degrees warmer. Without generating a single additional unit of heat, our grandparents could make their homes nearly half again as warm just by keeping the cold out and the warmth in. It was common sense born from necessity, and it worked remarkably well. Now that we've sealed the home, let's look at the traditional heating sources that actually generated warmth. There's something almost primal about fire, isn't there? The way it draws people in, the way it commands a room. Our grandparents didn't just use fire for heat. They built their entire lives around it. The fireplace or the wood stove wasn't just an appliance tucked away in some corner. It was the heart of the home, quite literally. Families arranged their furniture around it. They gathered there for warmth, for conversation, for connection. And the techniques they developed for getting the most out of that fire? Well, they're just as effective today as they were 100 years ago. Fireplaces and wood stoves. The traditional fireplace has warmed homes for centuries, and there's a good reason it remained the centerpiece of American homes well into the 20th century. But here's something interesting. Our grandparents knew that an open fireplace, while beautiful and comforting, actually sends a lot of heat straight up the chimney. Some estimates suggest that an open fireplace loses up to 80% of its heat that way. That's why the enclosed wood stove became such a revolution in home heating. By containing the fire within cast iron or steel walls, these stoves could radiate heat in all directions. The metal would absorb the heat from the flames and then release it slowly into the room. A well-made wood stove could keep a room warm for hours, even after the fire had burned down to embers. Families would bank their fires at night, covering the coals with ash to slow the burn, and wake up to a house that still held some warmth from the evening before. Pot-bellied stoves. Now, if you've ever seen photographs of old general stores, train stations, or one-room schoolhouses, you've probably noticed those distinctive round stoves with their bulging middles. The pot-bellied stove became the workhorse of American heating from the 1850s right through the 1940s. These ingenious devices could heat a 500 square foot space using just 15 to 20 pounds of wood per day. That's remarkably efficient when you think about it. The rounded belly wasn't just decorative, it maximized the surface area that could radiate heat into the room. Cast iron pot-bellied stoves from the 1920s, if properly maintained, could last over 100 years. Many are still in use today, warming homes and workshops just as effectively as they did when your great-grandparents were young. During the Great Depression, families who kept their wood stoves reported spending 60% less on heating than those who had converted to coal or oil systems. Sometimes the old ways really are better. Cooking on wood stoves. Here's where our grandparents showed real practical wisdom. Why heat your home and cook your meals with two separate fires when one could do both jobs? The wood-burning cook stove served double duty in countless American kitchens. You'd stoke that fire to prepare breakfast, and the heat would spread through the kitchen and into adjoining rooms. Dinner preparations in the evening would warm the house just as the temperature outside was dropping. The cook knew exactly how to position pots and pans on different parts of the stovetop, where the heat varied from blazing hot directly over the firebox to gentle simmering warmth at the edges. These stoves often had warming ovens above the cooking surface and water reservoirs on the side that would provide hot water throughout the day. Rocket mass heaters. While this term might sound modern, the principles behind rocket mass heaters go back generations. The basic idea is simple but brilliant. You create an insulated combustion chamber that burns fuel at extremely high temperatures, extracting every bit of heat possible. Then you route those hot exhaust gases through a thermal mass, usually a long bench made of cob, brick, or stone, before they exit through the chimney. The mass absorbs the heat and releases it slowly over many hours. Our grandparents might not have called them rocket mass heaters, but they understood the principle. An efficient burn combined with thermal mass meant you could heat a home using just a fraction of the fuel that a conventional fireplace would require. Cooking on fireplaces. Before the cook stove became common, families did all their cooking right in the fireplace. But here's something clever. They realized that cooking activities generated significant extra heat. Keeping a pot of stew simmering all day meant keeping that fire burning, and that fire was warming the entire room. Cast iron Dutch ovens could be nestled right into the coals. Kettles hung from adjustable hooks, called trammels. Reflector ovens positioned near the flames could roast meat while radiating heat backward into the room. Every cooking session became a heating session, too. Our grandparents also used their wood-burning stoves and fireplaces to heat water. A kettle kept warm on the stove provided hot water for washing. Larger reservoirs built into some stoves could heat enough water for bathing. That hot water could then be used in other ways to warm the home, from filling hot water bottles to simply providing steam that raised the humidity and made the air feel warmer. How many of you remember the ritual of bringing in firewood or the specific smell of wood smoke on a winter evening? There's something about that memory that stays with you, isn't there? Fire provides concentrated heat, but our grandparents had clever ways to capture, store, and distribute that warmth throughout the home. Thermal mass with stone. There's a reason why old farmhouses had those massive stone fireplaces that seemed to take up half the wall. Our grandparents understood something that modern engineers have fancy equations for, but folks back then just knew in their bones. Stone and brick aren't just building materials, they're nature's batteries, storing heat and releasing it slowly over hours and hours. Think about walking into an old stone cottage on a winter evening. The fire might have burned down to embers, but the room still feels warm, almost cozy in a way that modern homes with their thin walls just can't match. That warmth radiating from the stones around the fireplace, from the brick hearth, from the flagstone floor, that's thermal mass at work. Those materials absorbed heat all day long while the fire burned hot, and now they're paying it back, gentle and steady, like interest from a savings account your grandmother never touched. Families knew to position their heaviest stones and thickest bricks right near the heat source. A properly placed soapstone slab could absorb heat for hours and continue radiating warmth long after the flames died down. Heated rocks. Now here's something that might sound almost primitive, but it worked beautifully for generations. Did anyone's grandmother heat a brick or stone in the oven and put it at the foot of your bed on cold nights? If you're nodding right now, you experienced one of the most effective personal warming methods ever devised. In colonial America, families would heat large stones directly in the fire, sometimes choosing specimens that weighed 20 pounds or more. They'd carefully wrap these heated masses in flannel or thick cloth and tuck them under the covers at the foot of the bed. A brick heated to around 200 degrees Fahrenheit and wrapped in flannel could keep feet warm for 6 to 8 hours. That's nearly a full night's sleep with toasty toes, all from a simple brick and a scrap of fabric. The beauty of this method was its simplicity and reliability. No moving parts, no fuel consumption during the night, no fire hazard once the stone was properly wrapped. Just steady, gentle warmth, radiating outward exactly where you needed it most. Families would heat multiple stones and distribute them throughout the bed, or place them in sitting areas during evening gatherings. Children would carry smaller heated stones in their pockets during cold walks to school. The principle was always the same. Heat the mass, wrap it safely, and let physics do the rest. Radiant heat floors. Victorian-era homes with brick floors near fireplaces understood something that modern radiant heating systems charge thousands of dollars to replicate. Heat rises, yes, but warmth also radiates outward from any heated surface. A brick floor positioned near a fireplace became part of the heating system itself, absorbing heat throughout the day and releasing it slowly for hours after the fire went out. Walking barefoot across a warm brick floor on a winter morning was a luxury that required no electricity, no special equipment, just smart building practices and an understanding of how materials behave. Some homes featured thick rugs over wooden floors specifically to trap heat and create warm zones where families gathered. The combination of materials mattered enormously. Wool rugs over wooden planks over a stone foundation created layers of insulation that kept warmth exactly where people needed it. Heat with mirrors. Here's where our grandparents got genuinely clever. They understood that heat and light travel together, and both can be redirected with a well-placed mirror. Positioning a mirror across from a window or behind a candle effectively doubled the warmth and illumination from a single source. During daylight hours, a mirror placed strategically could bounce sunlight deeper into a room, warming areas that direct rays couldn't reach. In the evening, mirrors positioned behind oil lamps or candle groupings amplified both light and radiant heat. Some families placed mirrors near their fireplaces to reflect the glow and warmth into darker corners of the room. It was elegant, effective, and cost nothing beyond the initial mirror purchase. Cast iron served a similar purpose as a heat reservoir. Those heavy iron trivets, doorstops, and decorative pieces scattered throughout old homes weren't just functional or ornamental. They absorbed ambient heat and radiated it back steadily, acting as miniature thermal batteries distributed throughout living spaces. Our ancestors surrounded themselves with materials that worked with heat rather than against it, turning their entire homes into systems designed to capture, store, and slowly release precious warmth. Beyond heating objects, our grandparents had ingenious devices and fuels that required no electricity whatsoever. Now let's talk about some truly ingenious alternative heat sources that didn't require a single spark of electricity. These methods relied on simple science, a bit of creativity, and materials that were readily available in almost any household. Candle heaters might sound almost too simple to work, but our grandparents understood something important about heat physics. When you group several candles together, you create a concentrated heat source that can actually raise the temperature of a small room. But the real magic happened when they added a terracotta pot to the equation. This clever trick became especially popular during the 1970s energy crisis when families were desperate to cut their heating bills. The concept works beautifully in its simplicity. You place several lit candles under an upside-down terracotta flower pot, and the ceramic material absorbs the heat from the flames. Because terracotta retains heat so well, it acts as a thermal battery, slowly radiating that warmth back into the room long after you might expect. A properly set up terracotta pot candle heater can raise a small room's temperature by 2 to 4 degrees. Now that might not sound like much, but when you're shivering on a cold winter night, those few degrees can make the difference between discomfort and cozy contentment. People would set these up in bathrooms, small bedrooms, or reading nooks, creating little pockets of warmth throughout their homes. Portable gas heaters offered another solution for families who needed more substantial heat without electricity. These units burned propane or natural gas and could warm a room quite effectively. However, and this is absolutely critical, our grandparents understood the dangers involved. They knew that any combustion heating requires proper ventilation. Carbon monoxide is an invisible, odorless killer, and every family that used gas heaters made sure to crack a window or ensure adequate airflow. They never left these heaters running overnight in sealed rooms. Safety wasn't optional. It was survival wisdom passed down through hard experience. Before we continue, I'd like to ask a small favor. If you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, a like and subscribe truly helps us continue making these videos for you. We really appreciate it. Hot water bottles represented perhaps the most personal heating solution of all. These simple rubber containers filled with hot water became nighttime companions for generations of Americans. The hot water bottle was invented around 1900 and remained standard bedtime equipment all the way through the 1960s. Sears catalogs sold rubber hot water bottles for just $1.29 in 1955, which is equivalent to about $15 today. Families would boil water on the stove, fill these bottles, wrap them in a cloth to prevent burns, and tuck them into beds about 30 minutes before sleep. By the time you climbed under the covers, your sheets were toasty warm. Many people also placed them at their feet while reading in the evening, or kept one on their lap while doing needlework. It was personal heating you could take anywhere in the house. Clothing itself became a heating system during colder months. Our grandparents didn't just throw on a sweater and call it good. They understood the science of layering with wool and fleece, natural insulators that trap body heat remarkably well. During World War II, the British government's Make Do and Mend campaign taught families to wear multiple wool layers, and studies showed this approach could reduce home heating needs by up to 20%. That's significant. Wool socks, flannel shirts, knitted sweaters, and warm caps weren't fashion choices. They were survival gear. The layers worked together, creating air pockets that held warmth close to the body. Strategic room management was another cornerstone of Grandma's heating wisdom. Families simply closed off rooms they weren't using. Why heat an entire house when you're only occupying 2 or 3 rooms? Heavy doors were shut tight, and sometimes blankets were hung over doorways to further block cold air from migrating. The family would gather in the warmest room, often the kitchen or living room near the main heat source, and that concentrated warmth made a dramatic difference. Victorian homes were actually designed with this in mind, featuring doors between nearly every room so families could control their heated spaces with precision. Our grandparents didn't just rely on man-made heating. They also knew how to harness the power of the sun itself. Natural sunlight. There's something almost magical about that first beam of winter sunlight coming through your kitchen window in the morning. You can actually feel the warmth on your face, and our grandparents understood this wasn't just a pleasant sensation. It was free heat, delivered right to their doorstep every single day the sun decided to shine. Before we had programmable thermostats and central heating systems that could maintain a perfect 72 degrees around the clock, people paid close attention to the sun. They knew exactly when it rose, when it set, and more importantly, they knew which windows in their home would catch those precious rays. This wasn't casual knowledge. This was survival strategy dressed up as common sense. Here's something that might surprise you. A south-facing window on a clear winter day can pump out the equivalent of a small space heater. We're talking up to 1,500 BTUs per hour of free thermal energy just streaming into your home. That's not nothing. That's real, measurable warmth that our grandparents captured without paying a single penny for it. They didn't need fancy solar panels or expensive equipment. They just needed to know when to open those curtains and when to close them back up. The timing was everything, and families developed routines around it. As soon as the sun came up, someone in the household would make the rounds, pulling back the heavy curtains on every east and south-facing window. The goal was simple: let every bit of that golden winter light pour in and warm up the house while it was available. Then, as the sun started dropping toward the horizon in the late afternoon, those same curtains came back down like clockwork. All that heat they'd collected during the day would stay trapped inside thanks to those thick, heavy drapes we talked about earlier. Studies have actually confirmed what our grandparents knew instinctively. Simply opening your curtains during sunny winter days and closing them at dusk can reduce heating costs by 10% or more. 10% might not sound like much until you realize that's essentially free money back in your pocket just for paying attention to the sun like people always used to do. Solar thermal heating. Now, some folks took this solar thinking even further. Basic solar thermal principles allowed families to heat water and even warm the air in their homes using nothing but sunshine and some clever design. The concept is beautifully simple. Dark surfaces absorb heat from sunlight far better than light-colored ones. So people would place dark containers of water in sunny windows, letting them soak up warmth all day long. By evening, that water held onto enough heat to provide warm water for washing, or it could be used with hot water bottles to warm beds. Victorian-era home designers understood these principles remarkably well. They intentionally placed parlors and sitting rooms on the south side of homes specifically for winter warmth. These weren't random architectural choices. They were deliberate decisions based on centuries of accumulated wisdom about how the sun moves across the sky. So many families had that one corner of the living room or that particular chair by the window where Grandma always sat because it caught the afternoon light perfectly. These weren't accidents. These were discovered through years of living with the rhythms of the sun. The smartest households combined solar gain with thermal mass for all-day warmth. Remember those stones and bricks we discussed earlier? Well, placing them in the path of incoming sunlight during the day meant they'd absorb all that solar energy and then release it slowly throughout the evening and night. A stone floor in a sunny room could stay warm for hours after the sun went down. Dark-colored tile or brick near a window would soak up heat like a battery and discharge it gradually when the temperature dropped. Before air conditioning became standard, homes were built with cross-ventilation and solar orientation as primary design considerations. Builders thought carefully about which direction a house faced, how deep the roof overhang should be to block summer sun while allowing winter light, and where to place windows for maximum benefit. This knowledge has largely been forgotten as we've come to rely on mechanical systems to control our indoor climate. But it worked remarkably well for generations of families. The combination of understanding your home's relationship with the sun and having the right materials in place to capture and store that free energy created heating strategies that cost absolutely nothing to operate. Our grandparents were practicing passive solar heating long before that term was invented by modern architects trying to rediscover what used to be common knowledge. Let's bring all these methods together and see how our grandparents combined them for maximum warmth. Here's something our grandparents understood that we've somehow forgotten. They never relied on just one heating method. That would have been foolish. Instead, they created complete systems, combining multiple approaches throughout the day in a carefully choreographed dance with the cold. Let me walk you through what a typical winter day looked like for a family in the 1940s or 50s, because honestly, it was nothing short of brilliant. The day began before sunrise. Papa or the oldest son would be the first one up, and his feet would hit floors so cold they'd take your breath away. His first task was always the same: head straight to the wood stove or fireplace and get that fire going again from the banked coals of the night before. While the main room started warming up, Mama would already be layering her clothing. We're talking wool undergarments, a flannel house dress, thick wool socks, and often a knitted shawl around her shoulders. These weren't fashion choices. They were survival strategies. The whole family dressed in layers of natural fibers because wool and flannel trap body heat, like nothing else, can. As soon as the sun started coming up, someone would make rounds through the house, opening curtains on every south-facing and east-facing window. This wasn't just about letting in light. This was strategic solar heating. They understood that every bit of sunshine streaming through those windows was free heat, and they captured every last ray of it. By mid-morning, those sunny rooms could be 10 or 15 degrees warmer than the shaded ones. Now here's what really made their system work. Most families heated only 2 or 3 rooms in winter. That's it. The rest of the house was essentially closed off with heavy curtains hung in doorways or actual doors kept firmly shut. A typical 1940s farmhouse might have 6 or 7 rooms, but the family lived primarily in the kitchen near that big wood stove and maybe one adjoining room. The bedrooms upstairs or in the back of the house, those stayed cold. In fact, they stayed so cold that chamber pots were common, partly because nobody wanted to make that freezing trip to an unheated bathroom in the middle of the night. During the daytime, the family stayed active. Idle hands got cold, but busy hands stayed warm. Children did their homework at the kitchen table near the stove. Mama did her mending in the same spot. There was always something to do, and staying in motion helped everyone generate their own body heat. When you had to venture into a cold part of the house, you did it quickly, grabbed what you needed, and hurried back to the warm zone. As evening approached, the whole family would gather in that heated space. Grandparents, parents, children, sometimes even the dog, all crowded around the wood stove or fireplace. This wasn't just practical, it created some of the warmest memories many people have of their childhoods. Stories were told, games were played, and everyone shared body heat just by being close together. The nighttime routine was its own careful ritual. Before bed, hot water bottles would be filled and wrapped in flannel cloths. Sometimes, stones that had been heating near the fire all evening would be wrapped in old towels. These went into the beds first, warming up those icy sheets before anyone climbed in. The beds themselves were piled high with quilts and heavy wool blankets, sometimes 4 or 5 layers deep. Children often shared beds, not just because families were large, but because 2 warm bodies generated more heat than one. Families using these combined methods reported burning only 4 to 6 cords of wood per winter. Those who didn't coordinate their approach, who tried to heat more rooms or didn't layer their clothing or forgot to capture that solar warmth, they burned 8 to 10 cords for the same comfort level. That's nearly double the fuel for the same result. Which of these 25 methods do you remember most vividly? Share your favorite memory in the comments. As we wrap up, let's remember why these old methods still matter today. Now here's something worth thinking about. These 25 methods we've just explored aren't just relics of a bygone era. They're practical knowledge that remains completely relevant today. When Hurricane Sandy struck in 2012, families who understood these traditional heating methods fared dramatically better during those extended power outages. And remember the Texas freeze of 2021? Millions of people found themselves suddenly without heat, wishing they knew exactly what we've been discussing today. With average heating costs now exceeding $1,200 every winter, even incorporating just a handful of these techniques can save you hundreds on your utility bills. But it goes deeper than money. There's something profoundly reassuring about knowing you can keep your family warm regardless of what happens with the power grid or fuel prices. That's the kind of self-reliance our grandparents understood instinctively. Every single one of these 25 methods works just as effectively today as it did decades ago. The physics of heat hasn't changed. Thermal mass still radiates warmth. Draft sealing still blocks cold air. Layering still insulates your body. This knowledge connects us to generations who survived harsh winters through ingenuity and practical wisdom. So here's my challenge to you. Pick just one method from today's list and try it this winter. Maybe hang some thermal curtains, seal those drafty windows, or keep a hot water bottle by your bed. You might be surprised how much difference these simple, forgotten tricks can make. Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and share it with a friend who might need these tips. And don't forget to subscribe.